So it's not just a tech choice, but it's a strategic choice. And what excites me the most, and you might have sensed it as well, is collaboration. It's not just about buying software, but developing it together, working across ministries, municipalities. This could be internationally. There's so much potential, and I see so much happening there. And I see us as a leader in digital sovereignty.
Hello and welcome to the Open Matters podcast, the podcast that talks about open source matters that matter. From a country well known for its windmills, wooden footwear, and astonishing water management, we're diving into how the open source movement has grown to the point of shaping national policy. We are, of course, talking about the Netherlands, a country increasingly becoming a hotspot for open source momentum. We've invited a master local guide for our Dutch tour, Fabrice Mous, Sales and Marketing Manager for the Benelux region at Nextcloud. But that's not all. Fabrice also brings a unique perspective from his time as a government advisor, where he helped shape Dutch government IT policies. Fabrice, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you for having me. And Master Guide, I like that. Thank you.
Absolutely. So, you're the Sales and Marketing Manager for the Benelux region at Nextcloud. Are you able to give us a snapshot into how things are going in your domain?
Yes, so there's a lot happening right now in the Netherlands. So perhaps I can start this by telling you why I was asked to do this, because what we noticed at Nextcloud that in 2024, we saw a lot of traffic from the Netherlands on our website, a lot of downloads and also a lot of requests. And at some point, management asked me, because of this, increase of interest, if I would be willing to cover the Benelux region and specifically the Netherlands, because there's so much more momentum. And this was indeed a very good move on the part of our management, because indeed a lot of stuff has been happening in the past 9 months, and also because of the political situation, because we had a couple of motions happening in the Netherlands, which put everything on rocket fuel here, I would say. And the outcome of all of this is that, exciting stuff. So, for example, all ministries are testing currently with Nextcloud. It's not just looking if this is something they would like to buy, but they also actually are looking how they can co-build stuff together with us, which is more like a partnership, I would say, than buying from a software vendor. I find this extremely exciting.
I think you're being very humble there when you say it's exciting. When we were talking earlier, I think you were talking about hundreds of thousands of potential users. I understand recently you re-signed with Surf. That's 100,000 users at universities in the Netherlands. Is that right?
Yes. Well, so that's the amount of users indeed. So Surf is a very interesting one. It's an NREN, an education network, a local, a national education network here in the Netherlands. And they're working with members. And they have a couple of services out there. And one of those services is the Research Drive and Surf Drive service. And that's completely running on Nextcloud at the moment. And it has been received very positively. And that's the amount of users we're doing currently. That's one aspect in the education field. So to sum it all up here, Richard, so the central government is really, it looks like a partnership is shaping up here. And that's just the central government. You have the education space with SURF also. A lot of things happening there, and they want to scale up there as well. And then, of course, you also have municipalities, right? Like the local governments. And that was even a bit of a surprise to me what's happening there, because there they took up Nextcloud as a framework. So they were developing their own Nextcloud apps on top of Nextcloud, you could say, ranging from case management or FOI redaction, right? And even some kind of service bus solution, so you can manage your cases and appointments. So that's really exciting. And I think there's a lot of potential there in the field in the Netherlands of collaborating across those different organizations, be it a local government, the central government, or in the education space. So there's a lot of promise in there, yes.
Something else that caught my eye in your background as being particularly relevant to the topic that we're talking about today is your former work as a civil servant, and you were helping the Dutch government's IT policies. How long have you been an open source advocate?
Ooh, that's a very sweet question of you to ask. So I think it was in the 2000 when I started with Linux, SUSE Linux at the time. I was extremely a fan of SUSE Linux because of SUSE config and Yast at the time. I really loved that. And I was a big fan of the KDE on my desktop. So I think for me, it all started in the year 2000, playing around with Linux, making sure that the whole Linux environment worked for me, loading a lot of kernel modules at the time. But that was really exciting. And that and because I like KDE as a desktop environment, I came involved as a contributor, as a translator to be precise. And later on, I also started the Dutch chapter in the Netherlands for the KDE project. And that was really an exciting time. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the dynamics of an open source project like KDE, and also what it means to promote the stuff you're doing within an open source project. So the year 2000, I would say, is the year which kicked it off for me.
And you ended up advising the government on things like their open unless policy. Can you help us understand a bit more? What was that?
Yes, so I was learning a lot about open source when I was a student, and at some point in time you need to finish your study and do something in the field. So I wrote a letter to the Dutch government, who at the time had a specific program office which is called OSOS. So I wrote them a letter. I told them that I was passionate about open standards and open source and would like to do something within the office. And I got invited, and at some point they even offered me a job there. And that, for me, that kicked it all off. And I learned a lot about policy making around these topics. I think you could kind of sum it up under the term Vendrick motion, right? Which was a politician at the time. I believe the motion is from 2002. The policy said you should use open source software unless there's a good reason not to do so. And that was a very, very exciting piece of policy. And I was part of that period. And I learned a lot from that. I call this the first wave of open source adoption in the Netherlands and for the Dutch government. And I think there's a lot of stuff learned from that period. And I think that even helped us to put us in a better position now in 2025, because of course it did not fully succeed, but nevertheless, I think it was a good period to have in the Netherlands and to learn from.
I think we'll loop back to that in a minute. To go back to the present day, so clearly there's a lot of buzz around open source ideas, digital sovereignty, self-hosted solutions in the Netherlands. Before the podcast, I did a bit of preparation and I searched digital sovereignty and open source in the Netherlands. And there's things like the Directorate General for Digital Services. That's the EU Commission's department responsible for digital services. And they're writing very positive reports about the state of open source software in the Netherlands. They released a report in 2023 that says, quote, "The Netherlands has made significant strides in promoting the adoption of open source software within its government and public administration." And it praises the role of the Ministry of the Interior and Kingdom Relations as establishing an open source programs office. Also highlights things like you were saying earlier, open source adoption is not limited to the national level, but also has strong presence at a local level. Noteworthy examples include the decade-long efforts of the City of Amsterdam, the commitment of the Association of Dutch Municipalities, and the active network of public servants using open source. So we've got things like Amsterdam City on their own GitHub. So what is going on at the moment? Where is this all coming from?
I think what is happening here is that a lot of people are very much aware what it means, because we had this first wave in 2002 with the Vendrick motion. A lot of people learned about this, took up the narrative, took up this idea how you need to work with open source software. And I think with that, it's more, you can find more of these people within those organizations who can explain what open source actually does for an organization or a society at large. So I think we have much more people who are able to convey that message. And because of that, you have much more initiatives coming out of those same organizations because you have those people around. So I think the legacy of the first wave is that you have so many people out there right now who understand the topic of open source software, how you need to deal with open source software, develop open source software, how you can build communities between governments around open source software. So yes, and I think all these initiatives are basically showing that we have internalized how we need to work with open source software. So we have much more people who are knowledgeable around the topic, and that's why these initiatives have a better chance to succeed and exist.
When we were talking previously, you suggested that perhaps this first wave was more of a compliance checkbox people were perhaps trying to get around. Mm-hmm. So that doesn't seem to be the case anymore, you're suggesting.
Yeah, so you have the law or regulation, and you have the spirit of the law. I think that's two different things, I would say. And the thing I saw with with the Vendrick motion is that people took a lot of effort to explain why not to do things. So they were kind of making sure to explain why they did not choose for open source software and did not really try to choose for open source software. And again, I think that the people learned much more about this. And I think that's the result of the first wave. Became much more familiar with the topic. And a lot of people at the time who learned about this are now in other positions or are more deeply entrenched in those organizations. So it's become less of an exercise in how to avoid this, in how can we live up to the spirit of this law? How can we make sure that open source software can really succeed, and what should we do instead of just looking like a way out of this compliancy check? The reason for that, so sometimes I think we needed this first wave for this second wave to succeed. Let's move away from explaining why we cannot do it and move to a situation where we explain how we can do it.
So obviously this is where you've been doing lots of exciting work. I think recently you had an Enterprise Day at The Hague in May.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit more about that? Was there anybody there? What questions did they have? Where were they from?
So yeah, to give you the numbers here, we were expecting 50 people, maybe 70 people, and we ended up with 360 or 370 signups, and even an enormous show of people. I believe 306 or something showed up at the event. So we had to scale up the capacity, I think, 3 times even. So I'm very happy with that, of course.
That's pretty encouraging.
That is pretty encouraging. I think there was momentum as well. I would like to say it's Nextcloud, but I think it's also very much it had to do with the concerns in the field people have. The topic was very much on top of mind of everybody, and the event was perfectly timed for that.
And where were these people coming from? Were they enterprise, public sector, education?
A lot of public sector. Really a lot of public sector. But also healthcare. We had hospitals in the room, quite some hospitals at the event who were very keen to learn more about this. And education, universities, schools, a lot of public sector, basically. I think the bulk of it, and a few big companies as well who were there present in the room, just wanted to know. Everybody wants to learn how they can control their data and infrastructure. And I think, again, the event was perfectly timed because there was a lot of interest and need for information at the time. We are repeating this, by the way, Richard. We're doing another Enterprise Day in the Netherlands. I hope if this podcast comes out, we can promote this a little bit.
Fantastic. So how do we come and find you? Where should we go?
Well, the event will again take place in The Hague, and it will be on Tuesday, the 25th of November. I'm not sure if 300 will be reached again.
Well, the thousands of the Open Matters podcast will all book their flights to Holland.
You are very much welcome. I think we need to keep this on the agenda. I think that's also a reason for doing this again. And there's a lot of interesting stuff coming as well. I will make sure that these things will be told on stage on the 25th of November.
I mean, that sounds like quite a buzz, perhaps quite disruptive. Have companies like Microsoft noticed what's going on, and are they worried?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Companies like Microsoft have absolutely noticed what's going on here. I would say they are running a full charm offensive here, and they show up at the Dutch ministries. I've read about it in the media and I heard about it. And basically they have the means to do so, right? And they're presenting themselves as being a sovereign solution. This worries me a little bit because it kind of makes the conversation a bit harder because everybody claims the term sovereignty these days, right? So it's tainted as such. And I call this sovereignty washing. I think this is a term being used more often these days. And I'm using it also to explain this, what's happening here. It's not just Microsoft. You have multiple organizations out there. I believe Amazon is doing the same. And I also see Google using the same kind of words and terms because something is going on. Of course, you can say it looks sovereign, it feels local, but in reality, you are still bound to US law and regulations. I think that's really an issue at the moment. Yeah, sovereignty washing.
So that's a big claim. We saw recently the European Commission declaring Microsoft 365 as compliant with data protection rules. Microsoft say that they're committed to hosting data in the EU in physically separated clouds. Why do you label this as sovereignty washing?
Yeah, you're right to touch on that because let's be very clear here. It's our opinion at Nextcloud, and that's something we really need to make clear to everyone. We believe that true digital sovereignty can only exist when you combine open source and open standards. Full stop. That's the principle. Now, I understand, yes, the European Commission recently declared Microsoft 365 compliant, but this compliance isn't the same as sovereignty. Of course, you can have your data sitting in the EU. Maybe you can even tick that GDPR box. But if you don't control the full stack, that means the data and the infrastructure, you don't have true sovereignty.
You would argue that a Dutch company with Dutch software engineers located in Amsterdam running proprietary software, that would not be a digitally sovereign solution.
No, because if that software needs to come from an American software vendor, who can really guarantee me that the operational control of my infrastructure will remain? If so, and if an American software company is providing you updates, who can ensure me that those updates keep coming? Who can ensure me also what the code is actually doing, what they claim what it's doing? And you need to trust them. And I think that's something we need to be careful with, that type of trust. So that's why I think if you're looking for real control, full control, being data and your infrastructure, then open source and open standards is the way to go. Yes.
So actually the problem is not so much even if it's American or not. It's just, can you see the software? Can you access it? Is it open?
Yes. And can you make sure that your software is getting updated? Do you have control over that process? And if the answer is no, then I would say you're not completely sovereign on that part.
So playing devil's advocate a bit here, are we suggesting that governments should ban proprietary software or?
So no, we should not ban proprietary software, not at all. I think there's a place for both, basically, open source and proprietary software. And I think that's a way to look at this issue at hand. But we need to be, clear and open about how we tackle these issues around data control and controlling our infrastructure and when it's needed, right? I think that's an important point to make here. So it's not an all or nothing kind of approach. It's more like, when does it make sense to apply open source software in a situation? Because we want to have those complete sovereignty. We have those complete sovereignty needs. And when is it less important?
Where do you think that the Netherlands could be in 5 years with mass open source adoption, or perhaps if things go the other way?
So I believe in 5 years, we could be, I see the momentum in the Netherlands. I think there's a lot of mind share, and I see us as a leader in digital sovereignty. So we have all the building blocks in place, right? We have this open on less policy. We have an open source program office in place. We even have a digital strategy, right? We call it the DOSA, the DOSA, which is a digital open strategic autonomy agenda. So it's not just a tech choice, but it's a strategic choice in the Netherlands. So I have a lot of faith in that. And I think we're kind of maturing on the whole topic and also with what we can do in the Netherlands. And what excites me the most, and you might have sensed it as well, is that what I expect from the coming years is collaboration, right? So it's not just about buying software, but developing it together, right? Working across ministries, municipalities, and this could be internationally, but also nationally, right? There's so much potential, and I see so much happening there. So we are forming real communities around shared problems using open source software.
So you mention working together and development between open source companies and larger enterprise or government. If the open source option perhaps isn't as polished and needs further work, is it fair to ask these other institutions to work with you?
Yeah, so I hear this a lot, right? The not polished enough argument. I would say this is a bit of a short-term thinking, because you should look at this in the long run. Because in the long run, open solutions reduce dependency and lower cost. And that's what government should be aiming for. So, and honestly, open source today can, in so many cases, match or even exceed proprietary software. So the key here is procurement, I would say. If you buy only the lowest upfront cost, you won't get the best result. But if you procure with long-term value, then open source more than holds up.
Just as we draw to an end then, we've been talking a lot about governments and very large companies. Lots of people here are not going to be working in government legislation, or they're not all the CTO of a hospital. How should individuals be supporting genuine open source development in their governments or enterprise?
Well, first, I think the first thing we should go for, let's just push for open standards. File formats like ODF, open APIs, those make switching possible. So without them, even open source becomes hard to adopt. That's the first one, push for open standards. The second one, support vendors who give back. So check their GitHub activity, ask for contributions, and don't settle for freeloaders who only take. So check those vendors who support open source software. And third, and the final one, promote public money, public code. So if taxpayers fund it, it should be open by default. So raise that with your politicians, with your city council, wherever you have a voice. And I think most importantly, with all of this, share your success stories, because nothing convinces decision makers more than real world examples. And open source isn't just about software, it's about trust and collaboration. And I think my call to action here is quite simple. Whenever you have the chance to make a choice, choose open.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with us. It's really interesting and exciting to hear about how things are developing in the Netherlands. And of course, we should all come to The Hague on the 25th of November. You're offering to personally buy any podcast listener a Dutch waffle. Is that right?
Absolutely. Just come by. I give you a nice Dutch waffle.
Thank you so much again, Fabrice. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you for having me.